Good morning, everyone. How are you?
Very good.
Greg, Miles, Andrew, Ridley, Glow. Good to see you, Glow. Nathan, Anna, Mark, you made it. Wonderful. And many more, I think, will trickle in. I'll officially open and say at the outset, I'm in a Tasmanian hotel with a poor connection to Wi-Fi. So I hope that the connection holds out today. This is our 6th DAO day, and we're moving along at rapid pace. But today is a special day because if you've had a sneak peek at the website, the white paper version 0.01 is now available. Everybody who wanted to get their hot little hands on the written document, you could now do so and not have to watch the first 30 minutes of the launch day video. I know that will excite a lot of lawyers in the room. So I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands upon which we all meet today. I come to you from the land, Nipaluna land of the Palawa people, which is around the Hobart area. And I was quite saddened to hear that the native title rights, when the Mabo decision was handed down, didn't extend to Tasmanians because of this position that they had lost their ongoing connection to the land. So I have great sadness when I share that news, but also that one particular Tasmanian farmer has volunteered to gift back the land or provide access to the First Nations people that just want to be connected to what the rituals and the mountains and the waters that make them feel whole and home. So I think it's pause for reflection for each of us, just to remember and as we go through this LawFi DAO journey, what is the value of our connectedness to each other around the world with a piece of technology that is challenging every jurisdiction that we know. Our values and beliefs are respect, reciprocity, integrity, and kindness while we're doing things differently and appreciating that time is our most precious resource. And you'll see a lot of that thread through the white paper. It's come out at about 18 pages, so I think a good read for all of you over a coffee. I will go through a bit of an update over the past week, and a little bit of what's coming for the week ahead. And then I'll open it to community discussion. We've got a lot of great minds on the call today. Special call out to Ridley and Roy, who can share some insights about the AO art ball, smart contracts and that development exercise that hopefully we will leverage from. So very quickly, the white paper is out, and it's a labor of love. Now, but the consultation period or the feedback period will stay open until early October, and each person that is a member and contributes can say whether they feel comfortable or not to add their name as a contributor to that document. And the plan is that once that document has gone through community discussion and feedback over these 4 to 5 weeks, we call a general meeting and seek to approve that white paper by a special resolution, which in our rules is a 75% majority. One of the things, though, that the white paper proposes to challenge, and you'll see it in the purposes of our rules, though, is can we get to states of representative democracy? And a lot of constitutions and governing documents rely on votes by a percentage. And what I would love to see challenged is instead of 50% or 75%, that a vote actually passes because we've got a representative sample of the population across our First Nations audiences, women, men, LGBTIQ+, remote and regional backgrounds, and the list goes on. When I initially drafted the list, which you might see at, gosh, page 15 or 16, I came out with 21 categories, which was ironic and funny if you go back to the Bitcoin protocol and the limited supply of 21 million Bitcoin that was the initial position that I at least landed. But not to worry, I did think of a few more categories, so we're not too in line step with the Bitcoin protocol. You will see various references throughout the white paper that I do refer to Bitcoin as the earliest example of a DAO. And since the launch of Bitcoin, each blockchain and each blockchain-based application has progressively traded off more things for the benefit of either efficiency or incentives, like staking rewards, incentivizing teams, so pre-minting a supply of tokens for, planned distribution. And all of those things, whilst innovative, have introduced or reintroduced points of centralization and identities. And the question for LawFi DAO is as we go through our own establishment and operation is, what are the legal and tax considerations of all of those trade-offs? Now, the tokenomics model for LawFi DAO is, in one sense, very challenging, and in another sense, quite simple. Doesn't reflect a lot of the bells and whistles that you would have seen of the DAOs over the last few years. But broadly, it proposes the membership token as an NFT, the pay-to-rely tokens, one of which is the actual legal or non-legal product, another one which is the costs agreement or the engagement letter that's generated at the time that somebody relies. I anticipate that those are NFTs. And the others are the time token, where already we're seeing in this DAO and in a number of other DAOs, it is very difficult to attract and retain and keep core contributors to task on time. So the initial proposal was that you all track your time, including myself, and that a quite manual process initially is that time tokens are batch sent out to everybody that has submitted time at the end of the month. Now, some of the protocols and some of the literature that I've reviewed is that's just not going to cut it. So the final proposal that you will see in the white paper is that each person will estimate the number of hours that they would like to contribute to LawFi DAO in the coming month. And there'll be an exercise at the end of the month where the request is, what were the actual hours that you contributed? Now, this will result in a slash of the time tokens. So it will reduce the balance that you thought that you were going to contribute. And I think it will be quite a controversial discussion because we haven't really had tokens that represent a negative value in a wallet. We all refer to these things as digital assets, not digital liabilities. And particularly when we're talking with reputation and where the more time tokens you have, perhaps the more reputation accrues to your wallet and that feeds into your membership token. When we're planning a model that can negatively impact on your reputation, I tread very carefully around those proposals. So I hope to see very rigorous debate around what that looks like and try to get to a working model of recognizing people for the time that they're putting in and having that as a metric of our DAO, a real metric. Then there's the money token, which reflects the value of money contributed to our DAO. And POAPs, all of you who are able to attend the first DAO day, hopefully you have claimed your POAP because the claiming period has now expired, but those are going to be issued for special occasions and for the milestones that you may reach. Now, this all sounds perhaps logical, but that's more than 5 tokens in a DAO economy. which is also quite confusing. And in the DAOs that only have one token that do many things, whilst confusing from a legal and tax perspective, they actually give people more reasons to trade in that token, to use it, to have it circulating. And so where there is more of a trading volume of a token, as you all see, it increases its rank up the list on CoinGecko and CoinMarketCap, increases exposure, more eyeballs on your project. And ultimately, if we're trying to build a global network, that is what we want to do. So that in itself is a trade-off of trying to, in a sense, give legal simplicity to each token. It means more tokens and perhaps less traction globally. So I'll stop it there. I'm sure there's a number of things that you'll enjoy in the white paper, and feel free to red pen. At this stage, contributions can be made by sending the email to jp@lawfidao.com, discussing them with us all in the community, the DAO Day calls. And if you've got access to Jira, you can even add comments in the comment thread that way. But over the past week also, I've had some really fruitful discussions with Roy as a developer, with Paul Kang, who's an Australian-based security auditor, including for smart contracts in DAO protocols. I've experimented a little bit with Aragon Court. So in seeking to automate and make autonomous the rules of our DAO and the governance of our organisation, a key thing that needs to be part of our framework is a disputes and complaints management regime. Now, it's very manual in the way that the process is written down in our rules right now. And the purpose of experimenting with Aragon Court was, what is the experience like to perhaps direct a contingent of our members in LawFi DAO to be guardians that arbitrate over disputes or complaints that our members may have in our DAO, or people outward in, looking from the outside into our DAO and taking issue with a way that we might be approaching things. And so it's a really good option, I think, for the dispute resolution function of LawFi DAO, as for a number of DAOs. And again, in the establishment subcommittee that follows this one today, we'll dive into that in more detail. That again, to substitute the existing dispute resolution rules for a process that involves Aragon Court will also require a 75% special resolution at this time. There's been further exchanges of information to set up the bank account and the centralised token exchange. I won't bog down in this session with all of the detail required, but it is a long list which will be produced so that other DAOs can benefit from trying to collect that information at the outset. From the Pay to Rely group perspective, we've got Vic Wells chairing that subcommittee. And for all of the subcommittees, there's open calls now for nominations to be chair or co-chair, secretary, or a lead for any of the working groups. All of the scopes of each subcommittee are in the Eventbrite registration links, but over the weekend we'll add those to the website so that they're easier to see. And if you do jump onto the website, you, I think, can now more easily access the PDF copies of our rules, of the membership form, so that you can read it before you jump into applying, as well as our draft white paper. The Pay to Rely session, though, is going to be fantastic today. Vic has done some initial outreach to the legal profession bodies and the approved insurers of the legal profession to explain what the Pay to Rely model is and seek to go through a process of explaining it to them, and whether a costs agreement that is linked to an NFT is going to be sufficient or cause to, any concern or bring the legal profession into disrepute, and how we might best manage that. So Vic will provide a more comprehensive update around that process and where to next. Our membership token subcommittee, again, calling for nominations for subcommittee members and leads. I'll let Roy speak to this later in the session, but it's come to my attention that it might be too heavy of an exercise to get or to call for artists to submit artwork that go against each symbol of a person's attributes, so that when you display your wallet visually, or if somebody inputs your wallet address into something like a rainbow wallet, the artwork that comes up, if it's vector-based, we potentially have the opportunity to have that on-chain rather than the image files stored on a hosted server or through IPFS. So I'll let Roy go into that a little bit more. And finally, on the community building stream, Discord server has been set up, so please join if you haven't already. We'll start the beating heart of the DAO more so. Luke Higgins is now our head of meme culture, so you hopefully see some more of those through the Discord site. Jira is expensive. I'm already starting to get the invoices because we've been adding more people as the membership applications have been coming through, and so I really challenged this week with some of the people I was talking to, trying to understand, which software was really good and provided as close a functionality to what we're getting with Jira and the time tracking function. And a lot of people are coming back to me to say Notion, which is free to use. But this is, in just over a month of our DAO being alive, we're already in a position where each person has paid their membership amount of the US $130, knowing that it's to be applied predominantly to pay the Jira and other software licenses. And so to go against that and pick a software that is complementary to Access, I think that we'll have to put that up for some sort of a vote for where the capital would otherwise be allocated to, which for the professionals that will be required to deploy all of our tokens and review them, I'm sure it can still be money well spent. The submission to the UK HMRC is one that I prepared through my company, but we're going to kick off the taxation of token activities policy working group, which falls under the community building stream today. The chair of that working group is a woman named Nupur, who's based in Germany, international transfer pricing expert and a tax practitioner of a number of years. So she's going to open by giving a bit of a landscape overview of the taxation of token activities from a global perspective. And then we'll jump into the submission that I made around the tax treatment of DeFi staking and lending to the UK HMRC, and seek to see if it can be ratified or at least discussed by the LawFi DAO members, which takes the policy positions further and I hope enhances their robustness, because we're testing them with the market, or at least with our community first. Also on the agenda is submissions to the Australian Board of Tax Digital Assets Review and Australian Treasury's exposure draft legislation about treating Bitcoin not as a foreign currency for tax purposes. So there's been quite a lot this week, actually, and for the week ahead, it is trying to come up with all of those pieces of feedback and getting towards a model that we're working to implement in 4 to 5 weeks, with all of our tokens being available and having the LawFi system starting to really be up and running. We also spoke in the establishment committee last week around drafting, or the importance of now early engagement and drafting ruling applications to test whether the LawFi DAO is carrying on business, to understand whether we truly are an unincorporated association that is a registrable body with Consumer Affairs Victoria, or if we're not. And if we're not, it seems that we default to partnership. And as Miles rightly pointed out last week, that the Corporations Act limits an association or a partnership to 20 members. unless you're an exempted type of organisation. Now we have 20 members, more than 20 members. So we're potentially in breach of a number of laws already. And that's before we've really finalised our plan of attack. I'm not calling it a business plan, it's something different than that. And the other oddity, which you'll see in the white paper, is that a partnership is, if it is deemed to not exist, if it's carrying on an illegal activity. It's a question whether the nature of activities involved in a DAO would be considered illegal. But all of those need to be tested stat to give us the legal certainty to continue. And so the draft white paper, the V0.01, which is the direction that we could be going, but it's not the formalised approved direction of the DAO yet. All of that will have to be provided to both the Victorian and the federal regulators, and we'll start that discussion pronto. And for the following week, again, drafting requirements for the NFT, the membership token, the user experience design, what that's going to look like. It probably will be quite manual and clunky initially before we get resources to understand, test, and automate something that is a friendly user experience. And the pay to rely subcommittee will actively be seeking out key areas of expertise, particularly around maintaining an insurance pool and the claims process and what that looks like. So I'll stop there, take a breath, and I'll open the floor now to community discussion. I would like to point the floor first, if you're in a position to talk, Ridley, and then I'll go to Roy. Just from your perspective, would you like to spend 5 minutes talking about your experience in developing the AO ball experience and what that was like when you had to translate that into smart contract language with the help of Roy?
Yeah, I think, hi everyone. I think the technical aspect of it is probably best left to the professionals in the room, being Roy and then the team at Run It Wild who worked on that. I was probably more of the puppet master up the top, pulling the strings in different directions, coming up with different ideas, and then letting the guys that know how to bring it all to life do the work. I think hopefully everyone in the room is relatively familiar with the AO art ball concept and how it worked. If not, I'll give you a 1 minute rundown. Essentially, the AO art ball is a 3D rendered tennis ball with artwork wrapped onto the outside of it to look like a ball sitting in a classic little glass case. Each of those individual tennis balls was then tied to a piece of the Australian Open court. That piece of the court was around 19 by 19 centimetres. That was non-sequentially tied. So we used chain link technology to tie the balls together. So meaning, I guess, if you minted the first ball, you didn't necessarily get ball number 1 and you didn't get court plot number 1. You may get ball number 256 and court plot number 4,500. There were 6,776 balls in total throughout the collection. That number is pretty random, but it was the number where the amount of plots perfectly divided across the court. So the data that we were receiving was so intricate that every plot had to be identical. There's a nice storytelling piece that comes with that as well. The 6776 was this really nice symmetrical number to look at. And as we kept saying at 6776, it sounded more and more like a tennis scorecard at the end of a match. Storytelling was really important as we continued to grow this project, because it gave people, I guess, a reason to listen to us and then a reason to get more involved in the project and want to understand more about it. So that's probably one of the things that I always refer back to, is that really human element of, even though we were so data driven and there was no human fingerprint on the whole project, the human aspect of it was that there was story and there was there was kind of real life examples that always came into play. So the way that the gamification of the function worked was each of those NFTs tied to its unique plot on the court. We would then take 3D ball tracking data from Hawkeye, and each of the winning match points of each match of the Australian Open, wherever that ball was deemed to land on the court, the last legal bounce on the court was deemed the winning shot from that match. So that token or that plot or that NFT would then get updated with metadata from that match. So you can imagine, for example, the women's final, Ash Barty won the women's final. So that ball on plot number 2,526 or whatever it happened to be gets updated with a little bit of data that says this was the Ash Barty ball. It was in the women's championship and it was the final. The visual representation of that ball would then get updated with a little holographic sticker that showed that it was a match-winning ball. Obviously, as for anyone that knows the project, it was incredibly successful. We sold out of the first 50% under an allow list model with majority MetaKey holders from the MetaKey project. That sold out in about 30 minutes. That kind of caused an influx of interest globally, and our second 50% sold out 24 hours later in about 3 minutes. It was probably, actually, and Roy might be able to qualify this, it was probably quicker than 3 minutes. I think that the click rate on the website basically jammed up the chain so heavy that it took 3 minutes to process all the actual sales that occurred. To date, we've seen about 1,800 ETH of secondary market trading. And I think really uniquely, we then saw people moving plots around on the court. So essentially what would happen is when we revealed the ball, you might have an amazing looking ball, but you might be under the net, which is extremely unlikely to end in a winning point. So people were, I guess, sacrificing the art that they got for a better court position that might be up close to the baseline or in the service box. That then sort of, I guess, opened up these 4 or 5 pillars that we identified as to why people were possibly investing into the project. There was, I guess, the uniqueness of the project, the artwork, the data, the fact that data and the artwork hadn't really been brought together too much previously in projects like this. And then really the gamification element of it. And we were seeing that in the Discord where people were, I guess, constantly talking about how late they were staying up watching tennis. I've never watched this much tennis before. I'm watching every match until the last point because I want to see if my ball is a winning ball. And then obviously the technology aspect of it being so unique in the way that the artwork was being updated, the data was being updated, and overarching, the project had never really been seen previously. I guess the big challenge for us now is that the bar is it's set way up here, and what do we do with AO23 just around the corner? So we're kind of deep in ideation mode at the moment. Roy and I had a lunch this week to catch up and talk about what comes next. There's lots of emails and Slack back and forth at the moment around what do we do, and I think we're now at the we're at the luxury of time, but that's also sort of our enemy at the same time. Last year when we started this project on the 1st of November, we knew that January 13 was our launch date, and we had to make really quick decisions to get there. The 12-12 model was implemented, which was if a decision needs to be made and it's the morning, you've got till midday, 12 o'clock. If it's the afternoon, you've got till midnight, 12 midnight. That worked really well for us, but now we obviously have the luxury of time, so decisions are taking longer. There's more ideas, there's more politics that come in, there's more red tape that comes in now as well. So yeah, if anyone's got some great ideas for what we should do next, we've got a few in the bank, but always keen to hear from experts in the field.
Well, so no sneak peeks for LawFi DAO, Ridley.
If I had something to show you, I would.
That's all right. No, that was fantastic, and you know, we can only dream to be as dynamic and linked to a game that the world loves to watch. But our needs are similar, but a little bit different in the sense that the real value of the AO Art Ball for us is that database of collecting the data, collecting the attributes and feeding it in real time to what the visual of the token looks like. So thank you for doing all that groundwork. And Roy, can I pass to you? Did you want to share any insights from that process and from your perspective as the developer, what that was like?
Yeah, it's certainly been an amazing experience to work with such a fantastic team, right? Our partners at Run the Wild, who integrated with the Hawkeye computer system that monitored the tennis trajectory, and then we passed all that data and fed it into our custom, system that manipulated the metadata, and on a daily basis we refresh that metadata for the NFT, and there was actually a lot of human fingerprint in terms of double checking whether if the script ran correctly, and ensured all 6,776 balls were completely accurate every single day, but it worked flawlessly, and that almost never happens, right, for a project of this size, of this complexity. So it was a fantastic partnership work for everybody involved. From a technical perspective, whenever we do a new project, we try to push the envelope a bit, trying to look at what kind of innovation we can bring into the space to set the groundwork for the next thing that we do across the board, across a variety of different projects. So the AO Art Ball really set the groundwork of upgradable NFTs, and that's super cool. And potentially we can deploy the same mechanics for the LawFi DAO that we do here. For example, whenever there is a new skill set or a new event attended, we can upgrade the NFT somehow. A lot of the newer projects that we're working on are completely on-chain, meaning there's no external dependencies on third-party services. So a lot of the NFTs that we see have their image assets, their metadata hosted on a third party. Sometimes they're very immutable, but sometimes they're dependent on subscription fees being paid. So a lot of the newer projects, we try to generate its metadata, the thing that describes what the NFT is, as well as the image, the visualization of the NFT, completely via the smart contract itself. So essentially the NFT would be around as long as the blockchain is around, which is a really big statement, because we sort of see this technology to be around for the next 100 years. So at the same time, when we deploy that technology, the quality that we use would be a little bit lower, because the capacity for data to be stored on chain is quite low. So instead of doing a really beautiful picture of a landscape, we typically would use a vector-based graphic, so something a little bit simpler in terms of the illustration to portray the same graphic. So from that perspective, we would work with a graphic designer who has much better way of describing images, and we will work out the patterns of these graphics and deploy that graphic on chain. So yeah, from that perspective, it's really interesting, and potentially we can explore those options for this DAO as well. I mean, there are many different tools in our tool chest. We can deploy a variety of different things depending on what what suits the business.
Yeah, we're happy to grab that with both hands, Roy, and also to note that you've assisted quite a number of DAOs, even to the extent of helping them integrate with other software like Snapshot, which a lot of DAOs use to manage their votes. So we're getting a wealth of experience, and thank you for making the time, Roy and Ridley. Just with what you mentioned, I've seen Greg Oakford join. Did you want to make any comment, Greg, about what you're seeing with NFTs and the approaches that they're taking to the art? If you are minded to see if they're vector-based images versus the more full media and video files, is there a trend? Any reaction to that, Greg?
I would say Roy summed it up pretty well. I mean, there's a couple of sort of notable NFT projects like Avastars and Cyber Brokers. I think Roy and I both own a few Cyber Brokers. There's a few that I'm missing that are not coming to mind. I think Moonbirds are about to go somewhat fully on chain as well. So it does seem like some collectors put a premium on being fully on chain, but I think that there's a lot of people that just don't care. And I think I've said this many times before, and I promise Ridley's not paying me, but I really love the AO Art Ball project in particular, because I just thought that the Australian Open and obviously Roy and Run It Wild that were all involved sort of at that time in January really hit the mark of being entrenched in sort of the Web3 community and how projects were being run, rather than sort of doing more of a Web 2 project or Web 2.5, which I think a lot of the other sports at the moment are doing. And I don't necessarily knock the other sports, because I think it's better that they experiment with something than nothing at all. But you're seeing that, you know, in my opinion, the AFL Mint one is probably a bit more closed shop. That feels sort of very, maybe even Web 2.25. So, you know, that is, yeah, it's just a different way, right, to collecting your assets. It's harder to display. It's harder to port them over at the moment. And so, yeah, personally, I like it, but I also know that, you know, when I speak to certain people or brands, that they don't necessarily put a premium on that. But I also think that's because they've never had an NFT themselves. So it's hard for them to get their head around sort of some of the technicalities that Roy was talking about around third-party dependencies, etc. So I think it's going to be a really interesting time in the next sort of 12 to 24 months of where this push-pull discussion goes around sort of what I call more, say, the authentic experience that Roy and Ridley have outlined in the last sort of few minutes, versus sort of the more closed shop Web 2 model where we're going to call it an NFT. And technically, I think it is an NFT, but it's still a very closed environment. So yeah, that's probably the commentary I'd add.
No, it's really insightful. And I want to go back to something that Roy said, you know, if it's on chain, it exists for as long as the blockchain exists. And this is something that's come out in my legal and tax policy submissions too, that we're seeking to say tokens are property rights, form of property, and that we have rights to them, when actually it's more appropriate to say we only have an ability to use them whilst the network is supported. So for as long as the blockchain exists. And I know that Arturo has some thoughts on this. So Arturo, are you in a position to speak and comment further on that?
Yes, I am. Sorry, been running around a little bit here.
That's all right.
8 o'clock is not the best hour ever for me. So Joni, I love you. Amazing stuff. I would only do this for you. Yes,
Thank you.
We were talking about ownership, right? Yeah, look, we've been having some really interesting discussions back and forth, and having a banking background, a derivatives background, smart contracts for me is kind of it's an extension of that skill set or that knowledge, and I honestly think that having lived in both worlds, in the TradFi world, let's put it that way, and now in the DeFi world, the concepts of ownership are really demystified in a way. And when I say demystified, it's actually the opposite. It highlights the lack of understanding really of what ownership actually means. And bear in mind, I'm not a lawyer and I'm speaking to a room full of lawyers, but from a legal point of view. I think that the basic idea is to look at these early versions of what of how people speak about ownership with regards to the projects that we've seen. I think that games is a really, really interesting example, because people talk about Web3 games as being those games where you actually have ownership of the in-game assets. But it's a really, really questionable concept, because if the game ceases to exist, then you're left with nothing. And the real added value there, from my point of view, is not necessarily a concept of ownership, but more a concept of transferability of a right. I'd really like to see where the, you know, a conversation of people with the skill sets that you guys have could take that forward, right? And I think that's it becomes even more interesting when we start. I don't know, it's very early discussions, but with Joni, about thinking about how does regulated system work on smart contracts, and the potential requirements that we would need to have in terms of, let's call them backdoors within the code, that allow for certain movements of, let's say, ownership, for example, when creating a digitized version of a shared registry on blockchain, that you need to be able to move one share from a person to another outside of the control of the initial, let's call it, owner, for the lack of a better word. And therefore, again, question what ownership actually does mean. Yeah, it's going to be a fun ride. Let me just put it that way. I can go on for hours.
It is. It's rich with discussion, and the approach that comes to mind is what Luxembourg did. They've recognized in law that you can have dematerialized, tokenized securities, and treat the blockchain ledger as the member registry only if those tokens are deployed from effectively an approved contract. So in the similar way that we see the ERC20 fungible token standard in wide use, it was Roy actually that told me there's still security auditors that are reviewing deployments of that standard contract, that Luxembourg is essentially setting their own standard for regulatory purposes about which form of contract is needed to deploy your tokenized security. But no other, as far as I'm aware, no other jurisdiction has followed that model, and it's been legislated for now over than a year. So maybe they're still waiting for some testing before other countries adopt it. Go ahead, Artur.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it seems to me like the conversation is still very split between different skill sets. That's a major issue. And again, one of the things that we spoke about was the technological distinction, that you actually never own, you never have, let's call it, physical custody or even regional custody over the tokens, but the representation of a wallet is simply just that. What you own is the private key, and then the token sits actually on chain. And that could have repercussions that we don't understand yet from a legal standpoint in terms of ownership.
Yeah, and so with our membership token, the proposal is that it's non-transferable but socially recoverable. And so in the membership token subcommittee, what we're going to have to stress test is what is a social recovery mechanism that we wish to adopt, or at least as our V1. And is it right that that's a non-transferable token? And it sort of follows Vitalik's work around soul-bound tokens, but also from a regulatory perspective, to tick off some of the criteria, or I suppose not tick off the criteria of things that could accrue a pecuniary benefit from that person's involvement in the DAO, or financial benefit. Now, I know that I have got Mark Bland on the call, who is my go-to regulatory Web3 lawyer. Mark, are you in a position to speak and offer some thoughts at all? Mark Bland, that is. I know there's a few Marks on the call.
Hi, Joni. So I've just been on the move this morning. I'm trying to balance my phone in a suitable position, so if I fall over, apologies. Yeah, it's a really interesting discussion about ownership. And what's been going through my head is that tenuous connection with ownership, and how you started the call discussing native title, land rights. And so not characterised as ownership, but a right to use. And I've sort of traversed some very funny areas of the law over years, including tax-driven forestry schemes, where you have peculiar rights that emerged based on Old English law, like profit a prondra, like a right to take or a right to use, that happened in old sort of agricultural feudal models. So there's some really interesting concepts of ownership over the years and different forms of rights. And you know, as a sort of financial services securities lawyer, you know, I think about terms of securities. I mean, in a way, a share is something you own, but to use the analogy talked about before, that you know, our tokens will only exist as long as the blockchain exists, or for as long, but only as long. Makes you think, well, shares only exist as long as the company is registered. So raising lots of questions, not giving any answers, sorry. But it is really interesting that I suppose, you know, ownership is often, we've looked at this, and the advice we've worked on, Joni, is ownership being a bundle of rights. But depending what's in your bundle depends on whether you call it ownership or not. And there's various different types of ownership. So yeah, it's I think, you know, as the law works, you sort of work by analogy, what's happened before, but there might not be any analogy that perfectly fits, and I think that's what we're finding. Yeah, the considerations go on. I don't want to use the rest of the time of the call, but that's something that's, look, I'm really keen to keep talking about here, and happy to contribute here my ongoing considerations and work about the nature of the rights that we have. That one thing I did learn from these managed investment schemes that were, you know, trees and olives and avocados and such things, is that often there's a different characterization from a tax point of view than a corporation's regulatory point of view. So we've got, and I think we're seeing that already, that we have to think about how's this thought about from a tax perspective, how's it thought from a securities perspective. So yeah, happy to keep contributing where my thinking is, as long as it's of value. Thanks, Joni.
No, it would be great. And we're going to get into the weeds on that kind of stuff in the establishment subcommittee calls. And we've already had the benefit of Miles and Andrew Walton, who really been active contributors. So thank you again to those two. Andrew and Miles, does that spark anything for you? Are you in a position to speak up?
Thank you, Joni. Yes, it does. We have had for literally centuries in English law a legal form that has no owners, and that's a charity. It has no owners. Nobody owns a charity when it's formed. So I think there may be some interesting gullies, some of them dry, some of them fertile, to rabbit around in with respect to that. I might just add, and my head's buzzing because I only understand half of what you've been speaking about. But the Attorney General, parens patriae, in English law, is regarded as the protector of charities. So it only works with a fairly big role of the state when you have organisations without any owners. Yeah, which I understand is not in the philosophy of 100% of people who are interested in decentralised autonomous organisations. So yeah, anyway, I'll leave it there. But yeah, fascinating. Thank you very much, everybody.
It is a fascinating point, and perhaps we should tap the Attorney General at state, territory and federal levels to say, would you like to protect DAOs as the new breed of charities, please?
Well, the interesting part is that Attorney Generals are extraordinarily reluctant. It's almost a convention of not to interfere in a charity's affairs unless absolutely necessary, and usually that's only in tandem with the court in a cypre or other scheme of arrangement situation, which is very rare. And in fact, the complaint would be Attorney Generals have been too reluctant to act in the regulation of charities. But anyway, for another day.
Yeah, I look forward to getting into that one. Well, and I know, you know, DAOs, the way that they began is to introduce public goods and open source software that more people around the world can access and benefit from. And I really resonate with that charitable entity type characterization. And there's a bit of a myth, actually, because a lot of people that hold a DAO's tokens, whether it be COMP, MKR, and these are more the blockchain-based application DAO tokens, they feel like they're an owner, but actually, if there has been any statements made by the team, there are no rights, typical rights to the return of capital from the DAO treasury or rights to receive dividends. There's a thin right to express sentiment or cast a vote, and that's it. There's no claim to the goods or any property that is overseen by the DAO. So it's a very, very apt point, Miles. Just changing tact for a little bit now. I know we've got John Studley and Anouk on the call. John from a data analytics background, Anouk also another developer. John, I'll go to you first. With this talk of the structure of the AO art ball contracts and, sorry, forgive me, the data collection that's involved. John, from a data science perspective, what do you think the things are that we need to think about? And then Anouk, from another developer's perspective, is there any insights that you're able to share at this stage? John, are you in a position to speak?
I'll get my head around the ownership thing, around the rights. You can have a right under a legal system, but you also have a right under, you know, social convention. So I'm allowed to put stuff in my neighbour's bin, not because legally I'm allowed to, but because he and I have agreed it's okay. So it's
that's true.
I still have the right, no, don't legally express it. Well, from a data point of view, I think the key things that come to mind for me are firstly, sort of, you know, making sure that we're handling it appropriately. So is there you know, proper consent to use the data? Are we using it in a way that is socially responsible? Are we securely handling that information so that it's, you know, encrypted and handled in such a way that we're taking due care and diligence with it? And also only using it for the, you know, the purpose in which we intend. I think that's important. The technical, you know, the technical parts I won't go into, but I think it's more around the use of the data and making sure that we are comfortable as a community, and being transparent about what we're doing with it. You know, I've seen, at least in the corporate environment, and we've seen it with all of the, you know, Facebook and other things, when data gets used inappropriately, it can have, you know, poor consequences. And so I think we just need to be mindful of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Anouk, before I throw to you, I was just going over the W3C verifiable credential standards last night, and it reminded me of these privacy preserving principles of data minimization, and also tokenization of data, that we shouldn't share the actual data of my bank account number or my date of birth, but just a token that represents my age range, or a token that represents my geography perhaps. But we're going to have to, one of the hypotheses of this LawFi DAO in the membership token work is whether, in attempting to comply with those W3C standards, we can meet them. Our membership token is not seeking to be a verifiable credential, but some of the data inputs that we will need to have is a key one, whether a member is a qualified lawyer and their registration is up to date. Now, that is a form of verifiable credential, but none of the legal profession bodies, as far as I'm aware, have embarked upon the digital transformation of issuing, you know, a practitioner's practicing certificate. It's still a PDF, essentially. It's not in tokenized form, nor is it to the W3C verifiable credential standard, which is that maximum privacy preserving standard. We'll go through this in more detail in the membership token subcommittee, but all of the storage of data inputs, including the connection of a person's email address to their geography, to their wallet address, even if we don't have their full name, if the person does associate their wallet online, then there's a high degree, actually a strong correlation between that person's wallet and their identity, even though we haven't collected you know, the identity information, so to speak. So all of those will be really breaking down and trying to get to the most privacy preserving method for our own members, and instilling some learnings throughout that. I see your hand up, Arturo, but I'll go to Anouk first and then back to you, if you're in a position to talk, Anouk.
Yep, that's fine. Yeah, well, in terms of the question you asked me was mostly about developing something like this. One thought I did have in terms of Jira being, you know, adding up in terms of price. Have you looked at Lumio from Enspiral, which is a New Zealand organization, which is a cooperative and has a lot of the same philosophies, although it's not a DAO, but it has a lot of the same philosophies as a cooperative, and is really for social impact purposes. So they've created a collective decision making and collective action platform, Lumio.org. So yeah, that's great. Something that's worth looking into. So that's the first side of things there.
Thank you.
The other one, just in general, that yes, this entire space is about, you know, can we enforce things without a centralized third party? And that's where the rub is. You know, if you want legally enforceable property rights, then you're deferring to someone with a monopoly on violence, and you're really acting at the mercy of whatever the courts say. I think smart legal contracts can be used in conjunction with NFTs, but that's a separate conversation from what the rights are to the underlying artwork of, you know, a lot of the artwork NFTs, and what's actually enforceable as opposed to what is completely managed by the NFT itself and the wallet ownership itself. But I think these are all very large conversations. And another conversation I would love to have, which is too long for this particular forum, would be the crafting of proposals and the process that one should, how creating a proposal with only 2 options of voting is very divisive and limiting, because you're always trading off some sort of some set of considerations, and really it's all about who crafts the proposals and what their particular ideas are on that. And I think that's, yeah,
or biases or conflicts or lived
or
experience.
biases or conflicts, yeah, exactly. And and just the limitations of their ability to process the requirements and values and needs of a large membership.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Completely
if we've got more
agree.
than yeah.
Yeah,
So I think those are themes more than, here's an answer, and
there's never an answer.
Very complex issues. No, it's an ongoing process.
Yeah. All right, and so I know we're at time, but Arturo, I want to just throw to you before we close for the day.
It was more contextual to the previous thing you said, but we could definitely use Tornado Cash source code to actually solve the problem of a membership, and be able to prove that you're part of a group or something like that. So just wanted to throw that out.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a hot potato, and to be dealt with going into the weeds in our membership token subcommittee, because the high level is, yes, it has been abused. It has been used for money laundering and terrorism financing, but from a commercial and a privacy perspective, a person should have the ability to conceal their identity from the public ledger so as not to reveal commercially sensitive information or personally identifiable information, which could result in harm to them. So behavioral data and activity. On that note, I do want to lift the spirits a little bit. And as we close, if I don't see you in any of the other sessions today, just pause to be grateful for what you're proud about this week, your family and your friends. And we've talked a lot about what is ownership today, but aside from that, I think the richness of connection, whether that be ownership to land or ownership of things, just try and take a moment to be grateful. I have been investing in some sessions to understand who I am, who is my psyche. It's a form of professional business training. And actually a lot of us in the professional services world, in the legal profession, as well as in Web3, we can't explain who we are well. And one of the traps is that we feel we're finding ourselves in being able to connect to more Web3 communities. Perhaps that's truth, but also finding the time to detach from online and remove your consciousness from the way that we are forced to think in this web world, and just put bare feet on the ground, go for a walk on the beach, spend time with family and friends, live in the real world, is something that I've been reminded of this week, and I'd love for everybody to take a moment at least. So thank you for your time, and either see you in the next sessions or see you next week. Thanks, everybody.